That wouldn't make sense. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Everyone in the auditorium can be seated. Welcome all of you that are watching online once again, joining us here for another class in our parenting manual. And of course, as David said last class, and you've heard repeated, this is the manual on raising a child. And of course, sometimes parents can be children too and act like children. And a lot of these times, these things are the first time we're hearing this information. So we welcome all of you that are watching. We know there are many of you that are parents with children, and this is the first time you're hearing this information. And once again, we're glad you're joining us. We're really excited to see how much the parenting manual is spreading out across not just the United States, but through Central America, South America, Africa, Europe. It's really great and inspiring to see, because this is a book that will really help us in the training of a next generation, but also fixing a generation that might not have received this information, a lot of this information. This book helps me greatly. It helps anyone that actually takes it up to read it, to study it, and to apply it. And of course, a book is only valuable if you open it up and you partake of the information inside. And without doing that, the book has no value whatsoever. And that's why the Peaceful Solution is really like a treasure. Whenever you take hold of it, you open up, you read it, you start working to apply it, you start seeing the massive benefits that come into your life. But you also, in a self-evaluation of ourselves, we also see how much we truly need the Peaceful Solution and how much we need to work on ourselves to become a more peaceable person, to be in contact, in touch with morality, to the applying of the rules, and not just making decisions based off of emotions and doing things that are to make ourselves feel better. And that's truly what is the topic of this lesson 4 that we're going to be in tonight, which is the role of a parent, because we're really going to get into, as David was reading, what does it really mean to be a parent to a child? Or what is it really meant to parent a child or to be a parent? But we're also going to get into correction, the application of the rules. And, you know, a lot of times we see in society today, we can see this in our own houses, that we expect children to follow rules that we have not even taught them. We expect them to comply with rules that we've never instructed them. And then sometimes we will instruct them on a rule once or twice, and of course, we feel that, well, I've already told you once. Is that not enough? Well, as adults, think about when you go to do something. If you're being trained to do something for the first time, how many times does someone have to tell us to do something before we actually start getting that picture fully painted in our minds and we're able to start doing it to an acceptable quality where no one is finding fault, where no one is, giving you some criticism there, constructive criticism, as they say. But how long does it take us to be able to master a skill? Well, having a positive character is a skill that we have to master. And that's something that we need to remember as we went throughout the character, the acceptance, the self-control, the respect, and the responsibility unit. On into the building moral excellence unit, we kept repeatedly saying how this is a skill. And in the character unit, we learned that it's only mastered through practice, practice, practice. And of course, as a teacher, you have to practice, or a parent, a guardian, you have to practice, 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 reminding someone. But there does come a time to where if a person, a child or an adult, is, irresponsible, you have to start applying more than just telling someone to do something. I mean, when you think about it, how many times do you have to tell a child, don't run out into the road, and then it keeps breaking that rule before something tragic can occur? But of course, as a parent, if you're walking down the road and you're teaching a child not to walk out into the road, you're holding its hand, and you keep at arm's length, which is a very popular quote, you keep those within your control. You don't let the child get too far away from you. That keeps it safe. That keeps it protected. And of course, it's when you teach this child, you groom this child. You let this child grow, expressing why you don't. You just don't say, don't run out into the road. You have to explain why a child should not run out into the road. Because sooner or later, as the child gets older and as life gets more complicated, it gets busier, you're going to have to let that child go. And of course, that child's going to be having to make decisions of its own. And the only ability it's going to have to make these decisions are what we as parents and teachers have put into the mind, or through conformity, through influences of friends and so forth, what has been allowed to be put into their mind. And it's really a competition to try to put a lot of positive things in their mind, because the world feeds in a lot of negativity. And the negativity, it bombards us from everywhere. You know, we've talked about that before, how for every positive thing you can find on the internet, you will find, like, it seems like a million negative things for a person. And if you've ever sat down to try to, and I'm not telling you to waste your time, and I'm not telling you to go search negative things, but just consider if you're doing research on the internet, or if you're doing something for a school activity, if you're doing something with reason, not just scrolling through and trying to develop brain rot, not talking about that, endless TikTok videos or whatever, becomes of that. But think about, how hard do you have to search for something positive, something true, something of substance on the internet when you're working on a project? You'll get all kinds of, if you're searching for news these days, a spoof news article is like more common than actual news. And then you got to fight through all the political stance they have in news. And it's really difficult as adults who's really trying to find, the truth, to do something, to bring a presentation. Imagine what it's like for a child. And of course, they can only make decisions off of what they've been taught. Well, looking back over here, we're going to read the procedure again. David stopped in the middle of a procedure, just rehearse a couple things. I would encourage everyone to go back and watch his class. He did a very great presentation on the explanations he was giving. And of course, it will tie in hand with tonight's class and things that we won't have time to go back and review, but we'll just cover a couple things. But he left off in procedure 3, and you'll find that on lesson plan 4A. So lesson plan 4, page 4A. And our lesson plan here, procedure 3. And it says, have volunteers read excerpts under your role as a teacher and teaching the very young, on pages 25 through 27. Remind students that as parents, our role as teacher begins even before the child's birth. Although there are many concepts to teaching children, basic lessons on compassion, tolerance, and service to others can aid the growth and development of positive moral character in our children. And looking over to page 25, there's a couple key points just to hit again before we move on. And I want you to consider what's taking place in our society at this time, because really, what our children see, they're being molded right now, shaped, formed, developed. And imagine if a person is really getting into what's being shown in the transgender. You see that in the news a lot with transgender sports. That was in the news all week last week again. More news about how we need to remove immigrants that have entered the United States illegally by the thousands. And they'll specifically say 5,000, and this is a quote from the news, not just picking a country randomly, 5,000 Venezuelans here illegal. We need to deport them, get them out of here as fast as we can. We need to get rid of, whether it be Guatemalans, El Salvadorians, Mexicans, Colombians. There's just, the list goes on. And there's a lot of Haitians that traveled to Central and South America to travel up through to cross the border. But we're going to get into some things tonight because it's really important. If you put your child in front of a television right now, and even as a young adult, I've heard it from young people. I can't believe these illegal immigrants, these immigrants entering my country. Who the hell do they think they are? And that's a quote, by the way. And sadly, it's like you want to grab them immediately, take them to the airport, book a ticket, and let them go get a taste of what those people live in. And let them see how spoiled they are. And let them see why a lot of people want to cross that border, because this lifestyle that seems so easy is not offered everywhere. But we'll get into that, because culture is very huge. It was very huge with the author of The Peaceful Solution, understanding other cultures and not criticizing and condemning other cultures, speaking out of just complete ignorance. And it's a very sad thing it takes place. But you see here in the square box on page 25, law of cause and effect. To every action, there's a reaction. And to everything we allowed to go into a child's mind, there's going to be a reaction for that. For every negative thing we say about somebody, whether it be because of the color of their skin, their nationality, whether they're rich, whether they're poor, whether you think that, they're the ideal person or there's something a little wrong with them. I would dare to think there's something a little wrong with all of us, because we all need work. I don't know of one person that doesn't need to improve themselves. So for us to think that, well, if everybody would just be like me, we would have a better world. That's all we need. And then you find out the person's just a miserable human being. Well, if you look down to your role as a teacher, the very first sentence, it says, to teach is to give or share knowledge so that someone else can learn. And if you remember from acceptance and responsibility, both on page 11, and we've repeated this numerous times, when you're giving your child knowledge, you're giving your child the power to be able to make a difference. And it's very important that you always remember that knowledge is power. The application of that knowledge is wisdom. You can have a lot of knowledge and not put it to work. You can know the right thing and not make the right choice. But when that knowledge is applied, then you actually can produce wisdom. And that's where we see the benefits taking place in society. And right now, it's really kind of hard to find something beneficial in a child's life in society. But notice once again, it says, as a parent, you are your child's first and most influential teacher. Remember, your role as a teacher begins long before your child is born. Keep in mind that at 16 weeks gestation, babies can hear their mother's voice in the womb with no distortions. And think about the power of that and the bonding that takes place. And then think about anything negative that takes place when that child is in the womb of the mother. I know, and I've heard stories about women. I know there's a lot of people in the Peaceful Solution that have had children, and a lot of the mothers practice this very thing of they start reading to their child as soon as they find out that they're pregnant. They will actually play audio classes, and I've heard of people putting headphones on their stomachs, or they play it even all night long, but it's classes about positive things. A lot of it's Peaceful Solution, but a lot of positive things to actually help nurture and try to get ahead of this world the child is going to enter. Well, looking over here, David had already covered where it talked about teaching the very young. He read, teach your child to love learning, and that's very important, and it's very difficult too. Teaching a child to love learning when they're 4, 5, 6, 7, it's not so difficult because you can make it fun. And as long as you can get their attention, and as long as you can be creative, it tends to go okay. It's when they start getting 13, 14, 15. By the time you're 15, you know everything. You can tell your teacher how everything works, how everything goes, and then you get yourself in trouble, and you need someone to get you out of trouble. And that's pretty much how we all go in life, though. And we talked about that in the character unit, that when you get to that age of 14, 15, and 16, you think you're ready to take off and go by yourself, but you're not yet ready. As a young child, whether you're a man, a boy, a young man, a young woman, you're still not ready. There's a whole world of misery that you've been guarded from and you've never been introduced to. And, of course, your guardians, your parents, your teachers are trying their best to make sure you never get introduced to it. But there's going to come a time where you're going to have to make some decisions because you can't escape it. It's all around you. But you can limit the misery that is allowed into your life. And then he also covered teach your child about compassion. And remember, the character trait of compassion allows us to care about the needs of others and to desire to relieve their suffering. Now, I want you to think about that because we're going to get into some other things tonight. And think about, what is the world doing right now? And is the world truly looking at the needs of others? If you didn't see at the UN Security Council meeting, the Palestinian representative, he literally broke down crying. He couldn't even finish speaking. You know, he was able to pull himself back together, but he was speaking about the children that are dying from starvation, the suffering they're going through, and he asked the Security Council, why are none of you doing anything about it? Why are you allowing this? You have the power to do something. And of course, a representative from Israel sitting there at the table too, and he was yawning as the other guy was just totally crying. And of course, you start questioning, well, I thought the UN was supposed to be to monitor the nations. I thought they were supposed to be peacekeepers. Is it really so difficult? Well, it has to be difficult because what's going on in Palestine and Israel, it didn't just start. It's been going on for years. You know, and sadly, this man has probably seen a lot since he's a Palestinian. And I'm sure there are Israelis that have seen a lot in their own country, you know, a lot of suffering. And of course, when you look at the map of Israel and Palestine, you realize there's not really a dividing line. You know, you only hear about that in Jerusalem. You see children out there with slingshots, and they're slinging them around, and off they go. There goes the rocks, or the stones. But it's very spotty. It's like little neighborhoods inside of a country. And it's very hard to define two different countries in that area. But think about what the children have been doing. And then we've talked about organizations that actually bring those together, Israelis and Palestinians and other countries, Indians and Pakistanis. They bring them together in a camping trip, and they show them how to do things. You know, we even had one of the representatives for that organization speak at our last one-day event. They're going strong, and they're still doing their very best to help make a difference. And, of course, that's what it takes, is everybody working together to help make a difference. Bringing people together, but education in how to make a better decision, starting with children, is how we're going to make a difference. But think about what your child would see today if you were to let your child just to watch the news, something that's considered educational. What are they going to see? Well, here, looking at page 26, we're going to pick up where David left off with teach your child to care about others regardless of their nationality or ethnicity. Notice hate is a learned behavior. And I want you to think about whenever you see, and I don't care what country they're from. You could put any country, you know, in front, have entered the United States illegally. I don't care. You can put any nation from Africa, any nation from Europe, any nation from Asia. You know, you can put them in from South America, Central America. Put whatever nation you want in. And when it says they've entered illegally, you know, obviously there's a lot of people that have entered without going through the process of what the government has implemented for someone to be documented inside the United States, have a stamp on their visa, and to be here and to be allowed, whether it's either 60 days, 90 days, 180 days, which is usually granted, at least once you acquire your visa. And then think about what you see on the news today. And I'll bring up Venezuela because that's on the news a lot. And, you know, one thing that I've noticed traveling, I don't care what country I go to, I meet a lot of Venezuelans. And I have never been to Venezuela. Can't get a visa for Venezuela. Venezuela is not approving American visas right now. I've applied, but I haven't achieved one yet. I have friends in other countries that can go to Venezuela, and they are familiar with what's going on. And I talk to people through WhatsApp, actually, in Venezuela. And they give me an idea how things are going, and I got contact from them through meeting Venezuelans in Peru, which there's a lot of Venezuelans in Peru. There's a lot of Venezuelans in Colombia. There's a lot of them in Argentina. They're kind of scattered everywhere. In fact, it comes to the point to where you start wondering, is there anybody left in Venezuela? Because there is hundreds of thousands of them scattered all over the place. And you know what every one of them would like to do? They would like to go back home. But there's nothing there to go back to. They want the American dream, but they want it in their country. And we tend to forget, back in the 1950s and 1960s, Venezuela was the third largest economy in the world. They were wealthy. They're still wealthy, they just can't sell their product. And when you think about what these people are going through, you go to countries where people, they don't have running water, they don't have toilets. You know, we tend to think everybody has what we have here in the United States. And it's so, I won't say wrong, I'll say uneducated for a person to think that way. And when you see people, teach your children. When they look on the internet or they look on the news and they see everything about all of these people entered illegally. You know, I, along with an instructor from Mexico, we were traveling one time from Acuña to Monterrey because we had an appointment to meet someone in Saltillo in Mexico. We had some appointments to meet with some people down there. And when we were traveling, it was just numerous people walking, children, 10 and 12 years old, walking by themselves. You know, families walking with infants, mothers who are pregnant walking. Groups of people are, 2 or 3 at a time, walking all the way up from South America. Literally, backpacks, and they're getting robbed as they're going through Mexico, by the way, by the legal, the law enforcement who's making them pay bribes. Every checkpoint they come to, you have to pay. You get on a bus, they stop the bus so far, you have to pay. And think about what these children are going through, traveling. And they're told that we need to get to America because that's the American dream. That's the place, that's where everything will get better. And then once you get here, you find there's a country that can't wait to ship you back where you came from. We're not going to help you. And, this is a sad part. I want you to think about this, and think about this from a child's standpoint. If you have people that enter the country illegally, that's wrong. But if their country is failing, if people are starving, one thing you might not know about Venezuela, do you know what money they use in that country? In Mexico, they use the peso. In Europe, they use the euro. In Venezuela, they used to use the bolivar. But now they use the American dollar. Because their currency has been so trashed, that's what they use. Everybody there uses the American dollar. They don't even use their money anymore. It's just kind of pushed off to the side. Because they figured, you know what? We're under so many sanctions. If we use the dollar, you can't really sanction us now, can you? Because the American dollar is not sanctioned. And that's how they're very smart in how they're trying to get around it. And they've been able to acquire an enormous amount of American dollars. We realized that when we were in Argentina. The country of Venezuela was buying American money. And that's how you did your exchanges when you went for cambio or exchange of your money. But a lot of young people are seeing these things, and adults even. And when you see somebody that's come here and all of the things they went through, you really need to consider, why did someone travel that far to get away from their home? Because these people don't really hate where they come from. They hate what's not offered to them. They hate that they have no food, that everybody's robbing everybody. When you get into nations that are poor, your children get ransomed is what occurs if you don't guard and protect. Just do a search on the internet and see how many missing children are in the country of Mexico alone. Children are money in some countries. And sometimes people are just trying to get away. They just put a travel warning on the nation of Brazil. And I know we have people in Brazil watching right now, and I know they can vouch for it. But they're saying there's a lot of people being held for ransom. So they're telling Americans, don't go. And they said it's nationwide, not just in the side areas, but nationwide. But when your children ask, why is this taking place? Could you imagine if you just say, they entered illegally, they weren't supposed to be here, they need to go back where they came from? You know, that makes your child, you want to really tell a child, why don't you ask your mom or your dad, hey, where did my great-grandfather come from? Oh, somewhere in Europe. You know, we tend to think about this nation was built a certain way, and then we get out of it very quickly. And children get out of it very quickly. They're not educated in what the truth is. They're taught hate. And notice here it says, babies are not born aware of the divisions that we create amongst ourselves. You know, this is a taught behavior, whether it be a smart comment or a smart aleck comment, something negative said about someone because of the color of their skin, whether it be a darker color or whether it be a bright white color or whether it be a very dark color. You know, this is ignorance at its best. The variation in our skin color and nationalities only become important to our children if they are important to us and those in our immediate environment. Search yourself to see if any prejudice or stereotypes about others exist within your ideologies. You know, look at yourself. Examine yourself. Do you look at someone with a color of skin that's different from yours in a negative way? Do you think about someone, you know, and I remember someone said in a class, and it was a class we were having at a recreational center here in Abilene. And they said that, you know, when I'm out in Abilene, and the recreation center was not far from where my store is at. And they said, you know, when I'm out late at night and I feel somebody walking up behind me, I always look. And if it's a white man, I can breathe easy. If it's a black man, I try to hurry up and get in. And if it's somebody Hispanic, I really run. And I asked them, I said, have you've never been robbed by a white man before? You know they rob people, right? Are you thinking that because they're white, they're going to be law-abiding citizens, and if they're black, they might break the rules, and if they're Hispanic, they're definitely breaking the rules? And they said, oh yeah, that's what my parents taught me. I just told them, I said, well, I hate to tell you, your parents lied to you. I really hate to tell you that, but they lied to you. That's just like saying Santa came down your chimney for Christmas. They lied to you, okay? That's how much truth is in it. You know, it's just a harsh reality. And as you get older, you'll learn that Santa really didn't come down your chimney, and you'll have to decide whether you're going to lie to your children about it. And you're also going to have to decide when you get older that you're going to find out, no, it's not true about what you were taught about white people, black people, and Hispanics. And you have to decide whether you're going to lie to your children about that also. But you need to deal with reality and not accusation. And it's really sad when people say that. It's really sad. And this works both ways. You know, you can have, if you're white and you go to other nations, if you think a white person can't be suffer racism, you've just never been to the right places. I've seen it, and it's not a fun thing to be on that side of it. In America, when you're predominantly white, you don't experience it as much unless you go to certain areas. But when you go to other countries, yeah, you're going to experience it. Why? Well, it's taught. It's put into the minds of people. But notice here it says, search yourself to see if any prejudice and stereotypes about others exist within your ideologies. Once again, examine yourself, because that's what you're going to put into your children. Then root them out. Get rid of them. There's no reason to have these ideologies in our minds. Ask yourself if you accept generalizations about groups of people and place them upon the individual. You know, that took place a lot with September the 11th. Whenever we had the World Trade Centers, which was a very tragic thing that took place, and everybody that was a Muslim was considered a terrorist. You know, and I remember we had a teacher that traveled here from Trinidad. He actually was kind of from Indian descent. And I remember he came to an event we were having. I I don't really remember if it was a fall event we had in 2011 or if it was a spring event we had in 2012. I think it was more of the 2011. Because I remembered he said, he goes, when I sat down on the plane, he goes, I never felt so uncomfortable in my life. And I was like, why? He goes, because I look like an Arab. And he did. He looked a lot like an Arab. And he said, you would not believe. He goes, I was sitting here and people were staring at me from all directions the whole flight. He said, it was no question what they were thinking. And he said, I put each hand down and I sat there and I tried to stay still for 3.5 hours. Because if I would have scratched my nose, they would have swore up and down I was going to blow the plane up. And this is one of the best people you could ever meet in your life. But he was prejudged to be someone that would hurt somebody else. And you think about, if the adults are thinking that, what are the children thinking on the plane? What are they telling the children on the plane? What are they telling the children anywhere? What did the government tell the children? What did the news tell the children? What did we really put out there? It's really scary when we look at how we've created a lot of division in our world today, and it started with putting it in the minds of our children 20 and 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. It's really sad when you see these things. That's why when you teach the peaceful solution, you get to go to a lot of interesting places and you get to meet a lot of interesting people. We've been to some very historical places that we've taught in. Central High in Little Rock, Arkansas, which is one of the most historical sites for integration of our schools, desegregation. And we've been there many times teaching. And that when you step into that school, it's like stepping back in history. It's a landmark school, and they try to keep it the way it looked back in 1965 or 66 or 67. The only thing they've changed, they've added elevators and things for handicap because of rules, but everything else, they keep it looking the same. And it's kind of nostalgic to step back in that. And if you just research it, you'll see the National Guard, people that were of a darker skin, just trying to go to school, and the ignorance that was caused about people trying to get an education. Today's children, they don't really see, they really don't see that. My mom, when she went to school, she would have went when classes were separate and it was just beginning. When I went to school, it was perfectly normal to have people of all walks of life in your class. And, the only reason that I have the mindset that I have, and I see racism as completely foolish, completely ignorant, it wasn't allowed in the house I grew up in. You were not allowed to use derogatory words to identify other races. That was forbidden in my house that I grew up in. But I grew up across town, and one of my best friends, his father was the leader of a certain group that wore white garments all over the place. And, it was very interesting because my friend that I grew up with didn't really care too much for that. He really seen the ignorance in it. And it was great because his mom was opposed to it. It led to his mom and dad getting a divorce. And he was really blessed that his mom was able to penetrate his mind a little bit farther than his dad penetrated his mind with the goofidity and the stupidity. Because you think about the hate that is taught. Here, continuing on. It said, the world is filled with violence perpetrated by hate for others of different nationalities and ethnicities. This is a taught behavior, and it's fueled. It's actually being fueled to hate someone else. To that person's lesser than you. That person's not an American. They're this or they're that. They're so much lesser than you are. Why? Let me ask you, think to yourself, why is that said? And that's said a lot. If you live in America, you've heard that before. And I can tell you, if you live in other countries, I've heard people say that, well, we're not American, but we're still human. And I always ask them, what does that mean to you when you say that? What does that mean when you say you're not American, but you're at least human? Americans are human. We might not be very smart humans most of the time, but we're still human. We might cause most of the trouble in the world today, but we're still human. We might even be responsible for your suffering in your country right now, but we're still human. And it's really sad because think about in some of these countries that are suffering. For instance, I'll use Venezuela again. Country is suffering drastically. They have enormous resources. And there's a generation that has grown up. There's some people I'm dealing with right now. They're in their late 20s. And it's a family, the son, daughter, I think one is a grandson, but his mother gave birth to him. She died giving birth to him. So he's just a little bit younger because his mom was a lot older than her siblings. And you hear their ideas about how they are as a group of people. And you hear and you listen about how they've suffered in their country. And these people have migrated to Peru. And they're still suffering. They work 60 hours a week for $300 a month. That's their pay. And you know what they do with half of it? They send it back to Venezuela to support their mom and their dad. Because that's the only way anybody's going to survive. And most people that left Venezuela, they're sending money back to support their families. Because it's not much, but that's what they're doing. And these people live on next to nothing. Even though they know America, the United States, has sanctioned their countries and has caused this trend to take place in their country, they would all still love to come to the United States and be a part of the United States. You know, and I told them, I said, you know, if the peaceful solution was applied, the United States is not great because of any coincidental circumstance. You know, I know there's a lot more than what I'm going to say why the United States is the chief of nations. It's a really strong nation. But any nation over time can become a great nation. Possibly not the head nation or the chief nation or the strongest, but it can be a really great place. And in time, over a period of time, years, everyone in this world could share the wealth. Everyone in this world could prosper. And really, you would not even recognize borders from that point because one nation would be just as great as the next. Some of them are much more beautiful, you know, than the others. But it depends. Some people like desert, some people like tropical. But you think about what you're going to put in the mind of your children. No one would be identified by their nation. No one would care. If everybody had shared wealth, you could take visas and throw them out the door along with passports. People would just visit areas because they just wanted to see the beauty of the area. There would be no, well, I need to go there because life's much better there. You wouldn't have that. You wouldn't have it at all. You might have what we have in the United States where people migrate from one state to the next for jobs. Or they migrate because they want a better living, the warmer climate when I'm older. I like the cold, so I'll migrate here. But those things don't destroy the mind of a child. Going on here, it says, by choosing to see the color of someone's character rather than the color of their skin and appreciating them for who they are, you can begin to teach your child to embrace diversity by doing so yourself. Notice it starts with you as a parent, a guardian. Be sure to model those same behaviors after your baby is born by exposing him to different cultures. You know, so actually exposing your child to that, not downgrading them, exposing them to it. Let them see, you know, what's going on. I'll tell you one thing that I'm doing right now, and I'm having a blast with it, honestly. When you go to different cultures, they all have something they like to brag about. You know, and like if you go down to Mexico, and I have a friend that's sitting in here right now that it knows a lot about Mexico, and I have one watching. They'll tell you you've never ate a taco, you've never ate an empanada, you know, you've never ate something true because you've never had it the way it's really authentically made. And, you know, I had some guacamole that was made by an authentic, you know, Mexican person. And yeah, it was 1,000 times better than the stuff I've ate here in the United States. I thought I hated curry goat till I was in Trinidad and I was given roti and curry goat, and I realized, man, this is some of the best stuff I've ever eaten in my life. And, right now I'm trying to settle the debate which arepas are best, Colombian or Venezuelan, because that's like a civil war between those two countries if you say one is better than the other. And I haven't found anyone to actually make me one authentic yet. I have a sensitive stomach, so I can only eat it a certain way. But I'm trying to make them, and it probably is me not making them too well is why I can't decide yet. But there's a lot of, the author of The Peaceful Solution, when we would have events, and we still have these events, a lot of times during the events that were 7 days or 8 days, he would literally have different food from different cultures, and the people that came in from different areas of the world would actually help prepare these meals for hundreds and thousands of people that attended the events, so we could get an idea of these different cultures and the taste and the experience of them. And it's very important because he was always trying to teach us as students, everyone has something to offer that you didn't know they had to offer, and once you have it, it'll be the best thing you've ever had. And you'll always enjoy it. You'll have a common ground to discuss some positivity. And it's the same thing with candy. My children used to love these goat milk suckers. Caramel goat milk suckers. They loved them. And I always told them, those things are made in Mexico. They're not made in the United States. And they're like, what? Like, yeah, hate to tell you, but, Mexico has better Coke, better candy, better, a lot of stuff better. It's actually healthier too, by the way. And these are things that it's just a real joy to see what people do. I've only been to one place that has plastic straws. Everywhere else I travel, they have paper straws. They do not allow plastic straws in their country. And it's really interesting to see how it works. You also got to learn how to drink your drink fast enough because the paper straw falls apart before you finish your drink. But when you tell children there a little bit about what life is like in America, they're the same way. They're like, why? Why do you guys use plastic straws? Do you not know that's unhealthy? I'm like, oh, let me tell you, there's a lot of stuff unhealthy in the United States, okay? There's a lot of stuff. Starting with your fruit is so much better than ours. I'm trying to speak about these things to get everyone to understand that if you've been in different countries, and I encourage everyone to meet people from other countries. I can't encourage that enough. I know there's teachers sitting in this class right now that they now are teaching classes, and they're teaching classes in different nations, and they've developed friendships, and these people have developed friendships with them. We have teaching going on here. Last night, we have teaching for student teachers, and we have some of the best teachers in the world. And they're going to be making connections. I'm seeing people in this auditorium, they're actually going through this process. They're going to start making connections with people all around the world very soon, because there's a lot of people wanting classes, and you're going to make friends. And I had one just literally calling me from Ghana here as I'm teaching class. You'll make friendships, and it'll be really strong friendships. It'll be common ground friendships based on morality. Your children will become their children's friends. And we will end this separation through the teaching of positive character, through changing the minds of a generation. We can change this, but it really starts, as we see here, with the parents. And I really spoke a lot about that in this one area, but I really want to stress how much you as a parent, we as parents, can make a huge difference in the minds of the world just by training our children how to see the world in the proper perspective and not seeing it in a black and white, I'm more important than you, I deserve more than you. Can you imagine? And I told, this one child was asking me one time in Medellin, Colombia, why did you get to be an American and I had to be a Colombian? And what the child was asking, why are you important and my life is not? You know, I took my passport, handed it to the child, and I said, now, are you important? Does that make you a better person because you have an American passport now? Does that make you any better? Did it do anything for you? Did it change anything? And I told him, I said, you know, the only difference between my country and your country is your passport is red, mine is blue. The only difference between my country and your country is my country has a lot of wealth because it's been developed, and your country is taking advantage of. I'm just going to be honest with you. That's the sad fact. That's what's going on. And they asked me, well, how is my country taken advantage of? And I gave them an example of 4 men, and I would one day they would hear this, that in 5 years became billionaires off of monopolizing Colombian children. And I say children because they can't wait till they get 18 so they can start making money off of them. And they do it on a global scale. Those men live in California right now. They make right at $150 million every 2 months off of making sex slaves out of children. And they do very well. And they encourage it. As soon as you get 18, you work for us. Come work for us. We will pay you more than anybody else in your country. Most of those organizations that are owned down there that are facilitating it, they're owned by Americans who are making money, thousands of dollars, off of people they're paying $30 a day, but that's better than any other job they can get. And by the way, it's perfectly legal. It's not moral, but it's legal according to the laws of our government and their government. And I feel sorry for Romania too, because it's taking place there. Now, try to compete with that. Try to compete with people where you tell them, a lot of young people have asked, can I help do this program? And sadly, my first question has to be, are you involved in this type of job? If you were involved in it and you're no longer involved in it, don't even have to tell me. I don't want to know. But if you're currently involved in it or you have plans to be involved in it, you can't do this and that together because they contradict each other. But if you're willing to leave your job, if you're doing it, this job will pay you more, I promise you. If you'll study and you'll learn to teach it, this job will pay you more. And now you know the secret to finding teachers all around the world. The Peaceful Solution will offer them a better way of life if they'll just study, learn the program, and become a teacher. But if you won't at least dedicate yourself 100% to the program, then we can't dedicate ourselves to you. But if you'll do it, we'll do it. And I can promise you, there's a lot of people wanting it. But sadly, it's not just racism, it's monopolization of human beings. You know? And I really would that a lot of these people would hear, I really would, Americans would start taking a stance against abusing other nations. And I don't mean rioting. I don't mean going down and causing trouble. I mean stop, just like the Mexican cartel where it was just said by government officials, your drugs in Mexico are killing our children. And I'll give the man something. He's one of the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel. And he said, your children are buying our drugs. Teach your children not to do drugs. And he's very smart because he's right. If you just get rid of our customers, we have nobody to sell to. And, you know, I don't endorse his business practices, but he's right. Teach your children. Well, let's finish this right here. But I really hope that everyone, because everyone in this room that's training to be a teacher, you're going to be dealing internationally. Not just here locally. You're going to be dealing internationally. And I tell you, we really need to start getting these classes so people can see how great the teachers that they're going to have some great teachers here very soon. that are doing a great job, and everybody has different experiences. Everybody comes from different walks of life. And that's what makes anyone that wants to learn to teach the peaceful solution, that's what makes it so interesting, because you can take any person and put them up here, and you could have taught this program from 10 years, and you will learn from a person that's teaching their first class because of the experiences they've had and the way they have taken hold of the program and tied it into their life and the way they're able to connect with everyone. And it's an awesome program because every new person creates a new avenue to connect with someone. It's inspiring, and it just shows the mind of the author of The Peaceful Solution and how he was able to develop this, because it's just mind-blowing that it works that way. Continuing on here, it says, teach your children the importance of helping and serving others. And connect that with what we just talked about, taking advantage, demoralizing, treating others in a negative way. Remember what David talked about, teach your children about compassion. Talk to your child about the joy you get from taking care of her or him and helping others. Give your children age-appropriate tasks, from picking up belongings and putting them away to holding a hose to water the garden. Notice, this is what you're told to do to create a positive environment. Give your children these things to do. Not let your child do whatever they want to do. If you want to do it, do it. If you don't want to do it, then don't do it. No, actually teach them that this is something that's fun. This is something that's beneficial. Obviously, if you're watering a garden, you're going to teach the child more than just put water on it. Why are you putting water on it? Watch it grow. And I can tell you, children can get excited about planting something in the ground, watching it grow, taking care of it, and then eating the food off of it. That's something I grew up doing when I was young. That's where most of our food came from, was our garden out in our backyard. We didn't get to go to the grocery store to buy it because we couldn't afford it. But my dad turned our whole backyard, that's about the size of both sides of this auditorium, that was our garden. And we got a lot of food from it. We never did without. And, it was a great experience. But it was really exciting watching that come up. And I know children that here in the Peaceful Solution, they actually have the ability to be the same way. They're able to partake of this only because it's, we've been able to create an environment so people can see, kind of the back to basics is what the author of The Peaceful Solution would always say. Back to the basics. But here it says, even young children can assist and help around the house. Yeah, that's possible, and it should be done. Praise their efforts. So once again, don't tell them how little they did. Be thankful that they did something at all. Verbalize what a great help they are and how much you can appreciate their hard work. Sometimes we don't see the value of a person. We see them as numbers. We see them as however we have this ideology in our mind, and you really don't see the value of someone until you don't have them anymore. And that's when you realize, I probably made the wrong decision. And sometimes you don't have them anymore because, I had a cousin who, he was a year younger than me. His mom died. She died of a brain aneurysm right in front of him and his dad at 11 years old. And then the next year, he was 12. My grandmother died, who was very close to all of us. And then his dad died 3 months later, or 4 months later. So he lost his mom, grandmother, and dad all within like a year and 2 months. And his life completely changed. And you see how you don't know how important people are until they're gone. Even in a business, you have to value your employees. Your children, you have to value them because, they can be gone too. It's very important that we always see everyone for what they're worth, not just from a financial standpoint, but just as human life, especially starting in our own houses. So once again, verbalize what a great job or what a great help they are. As your child matures, so should his responsibilities or hers. Continue to give age-appropriate tasks. Never fail to communicate how much you appreciate him or her, even for the small tasks. So always communicate this, how important it is that they're actually doing it, and how thankful you are that they've done it. Have a reward system. Reward them for what they're doing. And that doesn't mean just because you cleaned up your bedroom, you should walk out in the driveway and find a new car. No, that means that if you clean up your bedroom, part of your reward is you have clean clothes. You don't have to go through, I don't have anything to wear. Well, look under your bed. Look at hanging on your curtain rod in your your bedroom. Look over there in the floor. There's a stack. I think there's an office chair underneath that stack. Actually, you might even find yourself a chair if you just remove that stack of clothes. Sometimes you have to show them that you're at an age now to where you know how to use a washing machine. You know how to use a clothes dryer. You should be thankful. A lot of people are washing them with a scrub board and hanging them on a line where it rains 5 days a week. So be thankful that you have this ability to do this. And actually show them, you're privileged. Possibly just because you have the washing machine and dryer, you shouldn't use it for a couple months. Possibly you should use a scrub board. And it won't kill you, because I've been to nations where people are doing it everywhere. I know people that do it to this day. They prefer to do it that way. But notice here it says, be patient, loving, and caring when teaching. Not heartless, harsh, or ruthless. But this holds true whether you're teaching your baby or your teenager. Be prepared to repeat, because children learn through repetition. Remember, practice, the making of a VIP. Also remember when you have to repeat something. And if you've ever been as an adult, I had to do something today, for example. Something I hadn't done since I was probably 16 years old. I didn't have to do it. I wanted to do it today. And I had to get someone who's done this a lot in their life. And they had to go through and teach me like I was a 12-year-old child, the very basics, because I'd pretty much forgotten everything. Even though I did it when I was younger, I had to be pretty much taught everything over again today. And they had a lot of patience with me, because it was one thing I had to do 12 times before I even come close to getting it right. And, at least nobody hit me in the head or said anything negative. I'm sure they were losing their patience, but at least they had the patience to do it. And, you think about as adults, sometimes children are just not getting it right because the picture's just not in their mind yet of how it needs to be done. And sometimes we need to find out better ways for them. But notice young children and many older ones are often visual and tactical learners. So when teaching concepts, use creative ways to stimulate their senses. Pictures, songs, or rhymes are all great teaching tools. Also be mindful and be cautious what songs you allow them to listen to, because every song is a teaching tool. Be willing to explain choices and situations in your daily life from a moral standpoint. For example, explain to your 2-year-old not to throw trash on the ground because we must keep the earth clean. So once again, it's also the room, the house, wherever they're at, not just when they walk outside. Think about how much sense it makes. Don't throw trash on the ground and then go look at their bedroom and there's just stuff thrown everywhere. So it goes rules inside and outside. Some of these rules, don't throw the ball in the house. Okay, that's an outside thing you do. Don't throw things on the ground. Well, don't throw them in the floor either. That's a rule that's both ways. It can operate either way. Be willing to listen. A great teacher is also a great listener. No child should have to say, do you only see the bad that I do? Do you ever see the great things? And that's one thing as a teacher. If you only see the negative things someone is doing, you have to evaluate yourself. You have to, when I was dealing with the author of The Peaceful Solution, we had a after-school program set up. And he taught me very quickly, whatever you have to say negative about that child, bring me something positive also. Tell me, because there's never just a person that's totally negative. There's always some positive in somebody. There's never just complete negative. And when I would take a situation, sometimes, because he had a lot more experience than I did, and he taught me a lot just from his examples and decision making that he would do. And he always said, well, okay, this is what they did. What did they do right that day? It didn't make what they did wrong that day any better, but at least there was positivity, and it helped you to keep seeing the positive things in the person. But finishing up this page, it says, your goal as a parent is not to produce a prodigy. You know, and a prodigy is a child, usually I think they consider a prodigy 10 or younger, that has exceptional skills all the way up to a teenager. So what if a child can do calculus at the age of 7, yet is rude, disrespectful, and oppositional to his parents and everyone he meets? Effective parents must see to educating their child not only academically, but also in positive moral character. Positive character traits must be instilled within their hearts and minds, and this is done through diligent, consistent teaching and role modeling positive moral behavior. So we're going to stop right there on page 27. We'll pick up next class on page 28 with procedure 4. But once again, you know, go through, examine, look at yourself tonight. Look at yourself the way you say things about other cultures or other people. Be mindful if you're sitting with a group of young people and you see a news article or something's coming out, you know, where it says this nation's done this or this nation's did that. You know, think about Palestine and Israel. And it seems like everybody talks about that. You know, tell them, this has been going on for years. Wouldn't it be nice if someone would take a stand and stop the fighting? Why are they even fighting? You know, ask someone from those countries, why do you even hate that person? I did one time in Washington, D.C. There was a person who was from Israel, and they were talking about Iran. And I asked them, I said, why do you hate Iran? And they just stared at me. They never gave me an answer, ever. They couldn't even think of one. And they didn't want to go, because I do. Because that would have looked really bad. But they hated Iran. And I could have probably asked someone from Iran the same thing. Why do you hate? You know, same thing if you were raised in the 80s in the United States. Russia was the enemy. Well, why do you hate Russia? I don't know, because, you know, Russians beat up Apollo Creed in the movie I seen. You know, it was some kind of foolish statement. It was no factual content to it. So think about that when we pick up our next class. Our next class is going to be this coming Wednesday, June 4th at 5:30. And we look forward to seeing everyone again. But don't forget your homework assignment. Go through and look at these cultural diversities and how it starts with children and how did we get to where we're at? Because we didn't change the way we were training our children. We actually have trained our nations to be this way. They've been taught to be this way. So I look forward to you joining us again for our next class. Thank you once again.